The rain fell like tears from heaven on the day Alara's world shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stood alone in the grand ballroom, watching everyone she had ever known turn their backs on her one by one. The silk gown she wore felt heavy, now soaked with shame instead of pride. Just moments ago she had been the most celebrated lady in the kingdom, the daughter of Count Ashford, the promised bride of Lord Vincent Marlowe, the girl everyone envied. Now she was nothing. Her father's face burned red with anger as he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the corridor, away from the 100 pairs of eyes that stared and whispered. His fingers dug into her skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the breaking of her heart. "You foolish girl," her father hissed through clenched teeth. "Lord Marlowe offered everything, and you threw it away with your stubborn pride." Alara tried to pull free, but his grip only tightened. "Father, please, he is cruel. I saw him strike his own servants. I cannot marry a man who takes pleasure in causing pain to those weaker than him." "Cannot?" Her father's laugh was bitter and sharp. "You speak as if you have a choice. Do you know what you have done? The scandal you have brought upon our family, refusing your betrothed in front of half the nobility of the realm." Her mother appeared in the doorway with tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Thomas, please. She is still our daughter." "No." The word cut through the air like a blade. "She was our daughter. Now she is nothing but a disgrace, a stain upon the Ashford name that I will not tolerate." Alara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "So, Father, you cannot mean that." "I mean every word." He released her arm with such force that she stumbled backward. "You have 1 hour to gather your belongings. Then you will leave this house and never return. You are no longer welcome here. You are no longer an Ashford." The finality in his voice was like a death sentence. Alara looked to her mother, hoping for some intervention, some plea for mercy, but her mother only turned away, unable to meet her eyes. Even her younger sister Maria, who had always been her closest friend, stood frozen in the corner, her face a mask of fear and confusion. 1 hour later, Alara stood outside the estate gates, with nothing but a small bag containing a few dresses and the little money she had saved over the years. The rain had grown heavier now, soaking through her cloak and chilling her to the bone. She watched as the great iron gates closed behind her, with a sound that echoed like the ceiling of a tomb. She had nowhere to go. No relatives who would risk her father's wrath by taking her in. No friends who would dare associate with a woman who had brought such scandal upon herself. The only option available to her was a small boarding house on the edge of the city, where women of questionable reputation often found temporary shelter. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Alara's life. She took a tiny room on the 3rd floor of Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, where the walls were thin and the cold seeped through every crack. Her money dwindled rapidly despite her careful rationing. She tried to find work, but no respectable household would hire a woman of noble birth who had been cast out in disgrace. She sold her jewelry piece by piece. First the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her, then the silver bracelet she had received on her 16th birthday. Each sale felt like losing another piece of herself, but survival demanded sacrifice. By the time winter arrived, her situation had become desperate. She had one dress left that was not worn beyond repair. Her room was due to be vacated by the end of the week, and she had barely enough coins to buy bread for 3 days. She sat by the frosted window, watching the wealthy carriages pass by on the street below, and wondered if this was how her life would end. Alone. Forgotten. Starving in a cold room while the world moved on without her. It was on one of these frozen evenings that Mrs. Fletcher knocked on her door with an expression that was both curious and concerned. "Miss Ashford, there is a gentleman here to see you. A very important gentleman." Alara's heart leaped with desperate hope. Perhaps her father had changed his mind. Perhaps one of her brothers had defied him and come to offer help. She smoothed her worn dress and followed Mrs. Fletcher down the narrow stairs. But the man waiting in the small parlor was not her father or her brothers. He was a stranger. Tall and imposing, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of a winter storm. His clothes were impeccably tailored in shades of black and deep gray that seemed to absorb the light around him. There was something dangerous about him, something cold and predatory that made her instinctively take a step back. "Lady Alara Ashford," he said. His voice was smooth and cultured, but there was an edge to it that sent shivers down her spine. "I am Duke Cale Thornwood of Blackmere. Perhaps you have heard of me." Indeed, she had. The Duke of Blackmere was a name whispered in fear and fascination throughout the kingdom. He was said to be ruthless in business, cold in temperament, a man who showed mercy to no one and who collected enemies as easily as others collected friends. It was rumored that he had never loved anyone, that his heart was made of ice, that those who crossed him simply disappeared. Women threw themselves at him despite his reputation, or perhaps because of it, but he had never shown interest in marriage or courtship, and he was a mystery wrapped in darkness, and now he stood in this shabby boarding house looking at her with those piercing gray eyes, as if he could see straight into her soul. "Your Grace," Ilara managed, forcing herself to curtsy despite her trembling legs. "I confess I am surprised by your visit. We have never been introduced." A faint smile touched his lips, but it held no warmth. "No, we have not. But your situation has come to my attention. Your very public refusal of Lord Marlowe, your subsequent exile from your family, your current state of poverty and isolation." Heat flooded her cheeks. Even the great Duke of Blackmere had heard of her disgrace. She lifted her chin, refusing to show weakness. "I cannot imagine why my misfortune would be of interest to you, Your Grace." "On the contrary," he said, stepping closer, your misfortune is precisely what interests me. Or rather, the strength of character that led to it." Ilara frowned in confusion. "I do not understand." "You refused to marry a man you found morally repugnant, despite knowing it would cost you everything," Duke Cale said. "That kind of courage is rare. That kind of defiance is valuable." "Valuable?" She could not hide the bitterness in her voice. "My defiance has left me penniless and alone. I would hardly call that valuable. Which is why I have come with a proposition." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope sealed with black wax bearing his family crest, one that could prove beneficial to us both. Ilara stared at the envelope as if it might contain a snake. What kind of proposition? Marriage. The single word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications she could not begin to understand. Ilara felt her breath catch in her throat. "You cannot be serious." "I'm entirely serious." His expression remained calm and unreadable. "I find myself in need of a wife. You find yourself in need of rescue. It seems a practical arrangement." "But we are strangers," Ilara protested. "We have exchanged perhaps 20 words. You know nothing about me." "I know enough." Duke Cale moved to the window looking out at the darkening street. "I know you possess the strength to choose ruin over compromise. I know you are well-born enough to fulfill the social requirements of my position, and I know you are desperate enough to consider even this unconventional offer." The brutal honesty of his words stung, but she could not deny their truth. Still, the whole situation felt surreal. "Why? You could have any woman in the kingdom. Why would you choose me?" For the first time since entering the room, something flickered in those cold gray eyes. Something dark and complex that made her pulse quicken. "Because, Lady Ilara, you are the only woman in the kingdom who has proven herself willing to face complete destruction rather than submit to a marriage that revolts her. That particular quality is exactly what I require." "I still do not understand." "You will." He turned back to face her, holding out the envelope. "These are the terms of my offer. You will find them more than generous. Read them carefully. Now you have until tomorrow evening to decide." Elara took the envelope with trembling fingers. "And if I refuse?" His smile returned cold and sharp as a blade. "Then you may continue your descent into poverty and obscurity. I will not make this offer again." With that, he moved toward the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back at her one final time. "One more thing, Lady Elara. Do not make the mistake of thinking this arrangement will involve affection or sentiment. This is a business transaction. Nothing more. Nothing less. But I give you my word that as my Duchess, you will want for nothing, and you will be treated with the respect due your position." Then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of sandalwood and smoke and the weight of an impossible decision in her hands. That night, Elara sat by candlelight and read the terms of his proposal. With each line, her eyes grew wider. The Duke of Blackmere was not exaggerating when he claimed to be generous. The settlement he offered would not only restore her family's honor, but would provide them with wealth beyond their wildest dreams. Her personal allowance was staggering. Most shocking of all was a clause stating that should he die before her, she would inherit a substantial portion of his estates. It was an offer no rational woman in her position could refuse. And yet something held her back. There was a mystery here, a secret hidden beneath the Duke's cold exterior. Why would a man who clearly wanted no emotional connection seek out a wife at all? What purpose could she possibly serve that could not be fulfilled by any number of willing women? But what choice did she have? In 3 days, she would be on the streets with nothing. No family, no prospects, no hope. This marriage, cold and loveless though it promised to be, represented her only chance at survival. The next evening she waited in the parlor, wearing her last decent dress. When Duke Kyle arrived exactly on time, she was ready with her answer. "Your Grace," she said, rising to meet him, "I accept your proposal." If he felt any satisfaction at her acceptance, it did not show on his face. "Excellent. We will be married by special license in 3 days. You will move to Blackmere Manor tomorrow. My housekeeper will see to your needs." The speed of it all left her breathless, but she supposed delay would serve no purpose. For 3 days later, she stood in the private chapel of Blackmere Manor, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that had been tailored perfectly to her measurements, and spoke the vows that would bind her to this dark, mysterious stranger. Duke Kale looked every inch the powerful nobleman in his black wedding attire, but his eyes remained as cold and distant as ever. There was no kiss to seal their union, only a formal handshake and a slight nod. She was now the Duchess of Blackmere, one of the most powerful women in the kingdom, and she had never felt more alone or more uncertain of what the future would bring. The first weeks of her new life passed in a strange blur of luxury and loneliness. Blackmere Manor was unlike anything Elara had ever seen. The estate sprawled across the northern hills like a dark jewel, with towers that pierced the sky and gardens that seemed to go on forever. Inside the walls were lined with priceless paintings and tapestries. The floors were marble and polished wood that gleamed in the candlelight. Every room was filled with treasures that spoke of centuries of wealth and power. But for all its beauty, Blackmere Manor felt like a tomb, cold and silent and empty of warmth. Elara was given the Duchess's apartments on the east wing of the manor. The rooms were magnificent with high ceilings and windows that overlooked the rose gardens. She had her own sitting room and dressing room, and a bedchamber so large it could have housed her entire family. But the bed was draped in silk the color of deep wine, and the furniture was carved from dark wood that seemed to absorb the light. Everything she could possibly need was provided for her. gowns of the finest silk and velvet appeared in her wardrobe, as if by magic. Jewels that must have cost a fortune were presented to her by the housekeeper. Servants attended to her every wish before she could even voice it. She dined on plates of gold and drank from crystal goblets that caught the firelight like captured stars. But she dined alone. Duke Cale was rarely present at Blackmere Manor. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, informed her that His Grace had business interests that required frequent travel. When he was in residence, he kept to his own wing of the house and maintained a distance that felt as vast as an ocean between them. They met for dinner twice in the first week. Both occasions were formal and awkward, with conversation limited to necessary pleasantries about the running of the household. He asked if she was comfortable. She assured him she was. He inquired if she needed anything. She said she had everything she required. Then they would lapse into silence, broken only by the clink of silverware against china. He watched her sometimes when he thought she was not looking. She could feel the weight of his gaze across the long dining table. But whenever she turned to meet his eyes, he would look away with an expression she could not read. After those dinners, he would bid her good night with perfect courtesy and retreat to his chambers. She would return to hers and lie awake in that enormous bed, wondering what kind of marriage she had entered into, while wondering if this cold, polite distance would be the sum total of their relationship for the rest of their lives. 3 weeks after the wedding, Duke Cale left for the capital on business. He was gone for nearly a month. During that time, Elara explored the manor and grounds, slowly learning the rhythms of her new home. She discovered the library, which held more books than she had ever seen in one place. She walked the gardens, even in the winter cold, finding a strange peace in the bare branches and frost-covered earth. She spoke with the servants, who were respectful, but guarded, as if they had been instructed not to become too familiar with their new mistress. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, who finally offered some insight into the Duke's strange behavior. The older woman had served the Thornwood family for 30 years and had a kind face that reminded Elara of her own grandmother. One afternoon, as they reviewed the household accounts together, Mrs. Winters paused and looked at Elara with sympathy in her eyes. "You must forgive His Grace, my lady. He does not mean to be cold. It is simply his nature." Elara set down her pen and met the woman's gaze. "Has he always been this way? So distant?" Mrs. Winters hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "The Duke has known great loss in his life, my lady. His mother died when he was but a boy of 8. His father was a hard man who believed emotion was weakness. Young Master Kyle learned early to guard his heart, to show no vulnerability, to trust no one. That must have been terribly lonely," Elara said softly. "Indeed it was. And then 10 years ago there was a woman, a lady of the court. The Duke was young, then barely 20. He loved her with all the passion of youth. But she betrayed him, used his affection to gain access to family secrets, which she sold to his enemies. The scandal nearly destroyed the Thornwood name. The Duke had to fight for years to rebuild what she had torn down." Elara felt a pang of sympathy for the cold man she had married. "He has not allowed himself to care for anyone since." "No, my lady. He swore he would never again be made a fool by sentiment, that he would never give his heart to anyone who might use it against him." Mrs. Winters leaned forward and lowered her voice. "But I have watched him these past weeks. I have seen the way he looks at you when you are not aware. There is something there, and something he fights against with all his strength." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you frighten him, my lady. You with your courage, and your defiance, and your refusal to be broken. You are exactly the kind of woman who could breach the walls he has built around his heart. And that terrifies him more than any enemy ever could." The words stayed with Elara long after the conversation ended. She found herself thinking about the boy who had lost his mother, the young man who had been betrayed by the woman he loved, the Duke who had learned to turn his heart to ice rather than risk being hurt again. She began to understand that the distance he maintained was not indifference, but self-preservation. He was not cold because he felt nothing. He was cold because he feared feeling too much. When Duke Cale returned from the capital in late winter, there was a subtle shift in their interactions. He seemed more present somehow, more attentive. He began joining her for breakfast as well as dinner. Their conversations remained formal, but they lasted longer now. He asked about her days. She inquired about his work. Slowly, carefully, they began to learn about each other. She discovered that he had a sharp wit hidden beneath his stern exterior, that he loved books almost as much as she did, that he cared deeply about the welfare of his tenants and worked tirelessly to ensure their prosperity, that beneath the cold facade was a man of principle and honor who simply did not know how to show warmth. He in turn seemed fascinated by her strength. He asked about her refusal of Lord Marlowe wanting to understand what had given her the courage to choose ruin over compromise. She told him about seeing Marlowe strike a servant boy for spilling wine, about the cruel pleasure she had seen in his eyes, about knowing in that moment that she could never bind herself to such a man, no matter the cost. "You were willing to lose everything rather than live without your principles," Duke Cale said. There was something in his voice that might have been admiration. That is a rare quality. Most people surrender their values the moment it becomes inconvenient to hold them. I suspect you have never surrendered your values. Your Grace, Elara replied. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. You suspect correctly, though it has cost me dearly at times, as it has cost me. But I would make the same choice again, as would I. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits who valued honor above comfort. It was not love. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the ice. Spring came to Blackmere Manor, bringing with it flowers and warmth, and a gradual thawing in the relationship between Duke and Duchess. They began taking walks together in the gardens. He showed her the estate and introduced her to the tenants, who seemed genuinely pleased to have a duchess again. She started accompanying him to social functions, where they presented a united front that commanded respect from even the highest nobility. To the outside world, they appeared to be a well-matched couple. But in private, the careful distance remained. They occupied separate wings of the manor. He had never once come to her bedchamber. She began to wonder if he intended their marriage to remain unconsummated indefinitely. If this polite friendship was all they would ever share. The question was answered on a warm night in early summer, nearly 6 months after their wedding. Elara had retired to her chambers and was reading by the firelight when she heard the door between their rooms open. She looked up, startled to find Duke Cale standing in the doorway, still dressed in his evening clothes, but with his cravat loosened and his dark hair slightly disheveled. "Your Grace," she breathed, setting aside her book. Her heart began to race. "I did not expect you." "I should have sent word," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "But I find myself in need of an heir, and a marriage cannot fulfill its purpose if it remains merely a formality." The blunt statement should have offended her. Instead, she found herself oddly touched by his honesty. He could have simply taken what was his right as her husband. Instead, he stood there, almost awkward in his uncertainty, waiting for her permission. She rose from her chair and moved toward him. "I am your wife in all ways, Your Grace. You need not ask." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I will try not to make this unpleasant for you." "I trust you," she said simply. He led her to the bed, and what followed was careful and controlled. His touch was gentle despite the tension she could feel in his body. He brought her pleasure she had not expected, finding places on her body that made her gasp and tremble. But even in their most intimate moments, she could feel him holding back, maintaining that invisible wall between them, guarding his heart even as he claimed her body. Afterward, he withdrew to his own chamber without a word. Ilara lay in the darkness, feeling the ache of what they had shared, and the deeper ache of what they had not. He had given her his body, but not himself. And she realized with sudden clarity that she wanted more than duty from this man. She wanted his heart, his trust, his love. But how could she reach a man who had built such high walls around himself? How could she convince him that she would never betray him as others had? That her strength came not from a desire to manipulate, but from a genuine commitment to honor and truth? The pattern continued through the summer. He would come to her chamber once or twice each week. Their joining was always careful, always controlled, always followed by his immediate withdrawal. She began to live for those visits, even as she hated the emptiness that followed them. She found herself falling in love with the glimpses of the man beneath the ice, the kindness he showed to his servants, the fierce protectiveness he displayed toward those under his care, the intelligence and dry humor he revealed in their conversations. But she kept her feelings locked away, knowing that any confession would only drive him further behind his walls. So she played the role of dutiful duchess. She managed his households with efficiency, so she charmed the nobility at social functions. She submitted to his touch with a willingness that bordered on eagerness, and she waited, hoping that eventually he would see that she was nothing like the woman who had betrayed him. It was in early autumn that everything changed. Ilara had been feeling unwell for several days, with a persistent nausea that she attributed to something she had eaten. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive, her maid Clara suggested an alternative explanation. "My lady," Clara said hesitantly, "when did you last have your courses?" The question sent a jolt through Ilara. She had been so focused on the distance between herself and her husband that she had failed to notice the absence of something she had come to expect. Quick calculation confirmed what Clara suspected. She was nearly 7 weeks late. The physician was summoned. His examination confirmed what Ilara had already begun to suspect. She was with child. The news filled her with a joy so fierce it took her breath away. But it was followed immediately by fear. How would Duke Kyle react? Would he be pleased that she had fulfilled her primary duty? Or would the prospect of a child make him even more distant? Would he see this as the completion of their arrangement and withdraw from her life entirely? She decided to tell him that evening after dinner. But before she could speak, he made an announcement that stopped her heart cold. "Ilara." "I have been thinking," Duke Kale said, setting down his wineglass. "Perhaps it would be best if you took residence at the summer estate. The air there is better, and you would have more freedom." The words hit her like a physical blow. He was sending her away. After everything they had shared, he was banishing her from his life. The child growing inside her suddenly felt like a weight pressing on her chest, threatening to crush her. "Have I displeased you in some way?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and she saw something break in his eyes. "No, you have been everything I could have asked for, but that is precisely the problem." "I do not understand." He stood abruptly and moved to the window, his back rigid with tension. "You ask too much of me, Ilara. Your very presence here is a torment I can no longer endure." She rose from her chair, anger finally breaking through her careful control. "A torment? You married me. You come to my bed. You treat me with kindness and respect. And now you call me a torment? Because I am falling in love with you," he said, turning to face her. The confession seemed torn from the depths of his soul. "And I cannot bear it. I cannot bear to love you, knowing that one day you might use that love to destroy me as she did. I thought I could keep my distance. I thought I could maintain control. But every day it becomes harder. Every moment with you chips away at the walls I built. and I am terrified of what will happen when those walls finally crumble." Alara stared at him, seeing for the first time the raw vulnerability beneath his cold exterior. This proud, powerful man was not sending her away because he did not care. He was sending her away because he cared too much. "I am carrying your child," she said quietly. The color drained from his face. He gripped the window frame so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What did you say?" "I'm with child. About 7 weeks, the physician believes." She moved toward him slowly. "And I need you to listen to me very carefully, Kyle. I am not her. I will never be her. I chose ruin over compromising my principles. I chose poverty over betraying my values. Do you truly believe I would betray the man I love?" "You love me?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "With all my heart. I have loved you for months. I fell in love with your strength and your honor and the kindness you show when you think no one is watching. I fell in love with a man who married a disgraced woman, not out of pity, but because he saw value in her defiance. I fell in love with you, Cale Thornwood, and I will continue to love you, whether you send me away or keep me here. But please, I beg you, do not condemn our child to grow up without knowing their father's love." For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then, with a sound that was half laugh and half sob, he crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he said against her hair. "God help me, Alara. I love you so much it terrifies me. But I cannot fight it anymore. I do not want to fight it anymore." She wrapped her arms around him, holding tight to this man who had finally let down his walls. "Then do not fight. Trust me. Trust in our love." He kissed her then with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both had tears on their cheeks. "Our child will be born of love," he said, wonderingly, his hand resting gently on her stomach. "Not duty, not obligation, but real love. The greatest love," she confirmed. The months that followed were filled with more happiness than Alara had ever known. Duke Cale was transformed, becoming warm and attentive and openly affectionate. He talked to their unborn child and read aloud from his favorite books. He held her through the difficult days of pregnancy and never left her side. When their son was born on a bright spring morning, Kyle wept as he held the tiny, perfect child they had created together. Little William Cale Thornwood was, in his father's opinion, the most beautiful baby ever born. Years later, when their grandchildren would ask how their love story began, Alara would smile and tell them that sometimes the coldest hearts hold the warmest love. That sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. That courage and honor and choosing what is right over what is easy can lead to happiness beyond imagining. She had been abandoned and cast out. But in losing everything, she had found something far more precious. A love that had melted the ice around a broken heart. A partnership built on trust and respect. A family bound by devotion that would endure for all their days. And she would not have changed a single moment of the journey that had brought her to this perfect ending.